Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Oh, wait, I just want to make sure people can. There we go. Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is France Bognon, and I'm the Program Director of the Innovative Peace Fund at ICANN, the International Civil Society Action Network. I'm very happy to be here in person and to see at least half of you in person and some virtually, hopefully, inshallah. It's really great to be here. Thank you all for coming to a very timely discussion around the Material Support Clause, or provision, statute, and its impact on peace building. I am honored that we have three of our partners. It's ICANN partners from the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, WAS, and we get to have one in person here, who we'll come to in a minute, and two online. So I think we will get started, assuming you guys will let us know if there are any technical issues and you're not able to hear us or see us online. We'll open up with an introduction from our colleague Ashley Subramanian Montgomery at the Charities and Securities Network, who's going to give us a little bit of an overview on the policy, the bigger picture around the Material Support Statute and some of its implications. And then we will have some examples from our colleagues, one Abir Haj Ibrahim, who's from Syria, Zarqa Yaftali, who's from Afghanistan, and Halima Mohammed, who's from Kenya. And they're going to be able to give us some real examples of how the Material Support Statute actually has implications on the ground for peace building and what that means for their work as women-led peace-building organizations in conflict countries. So with that, I will pass it over to our colleague, Ashley.
Okay, thank you so much, France.
Kara, can you share your screen? Just click onto your screen. Go ahead, sorry.
No worries. So yeah, as France mentioned, I'm going to give a little bit of a historical overview of the Material Support Statute, what it means in practice. We'll hear that a little bit more from our colleagues, but kind of walk us through what it is and where we are with it today. So we'll highlight some impacts on peace building. Megan will touch on ways that civil society has tried to address the issue, and then we'll also unpack a little bit of the gendered impacts of the statute. So if we could go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So first we'll start with what is the U.S. Material Support Statute. Under U.S. law, providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization is prohibited under AEDPA, which is the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. So essentially, it's the legal prohibition on providing material support to officially designated foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs, whether primarily FTOs, but also to individuals or companies as well. It really is at the heart of a lot of U.S. counterterrorism measures, and it affects anyone that's operating in areas where FTOs are present. So think of civilians living in FTO-designated or controlled areas. The U.S. definition is the broadest among Western democracies, and it has particularly counterproductive impacts on many peacebuilding and life-saving programs that are offered by NPOs who need to operate in conflict zones or disaster zones. And we'll hear a little bit more about those as we go. I will note, because I think it's important to say, that the Material Support Statute is and can be very confusing because it's defined differently in counterterrorism law versus immigration law. And under executive orders, there's no definition of it at all, which makes it very, very hard to operate under and to navigate. In terms of what the definition of it is, it of course includes, in terms of what's prohibited, it of course includes things like funds and weapons, but it also prohibits personnel training and expert advice and assistance. So this, next slide please. I want to just quickly note that the last modification made to this was in 2004. Obviously, the security situation is different now, the contextual situations are different, but we're still operating under this very post 9/11 over-securitized, over-militarized approach, and this statute is really in line with that. So it's not keeping up with kind of the modern context and where we actually are today. I also want to talk a little bit about the gendered impacts because it does disproportionately impact women and girls and women-led civil society organizations. So one example of this is the U.S. prohibits providing support to women survivors of terrorism who are located in areas where FTOs are operating and under often not living there by their own choice, but living there, they're prohibited from providing support in these areas. One prime example of this is in Nigeria in 2014, when a number of the Chibok girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram were rescued. The U.S. refused to provide them any kind of psychosocial or any other support or services because they said that they had engaged with a terrorist organization, with Boko Haram, even though they were kidnapped, and obviously this was not their choice. Next slide, please. So the statute does have a humanitarian exemption to engage FTOs, but this is limited only to provisions of religious materials and medicines. So it doesn't really, in practice, it doesn't actually do a whole lot, unfortunately. Next slide, please. There is also a provision within AEDPA that creates an exception to the prohibition on personnel training or expert advice or assistance to an FTO. But this comes with a very, very big caveat, which is that to secure this exception, you need approval from the Secretary of State with the concurrence of the Attorney General. Next slide, please. So this means that in practice, it's rendered essentially an ineffective exception because the Department of State has never actually used it, and there's no process for actually securing this permission. So it exists, but in practice, it's not very effective or actually useful. Next slide, please. A few further challenges that the material support statute presents is that the definition still remains really too broad as to be workable, even today. Since executive orders don't define the term, we're still defaulting to the EDPA definition and operating under that. And it also really undermines current bipartisan legislation and stated U.S. foreign policy goals because it goes in direct contrast to things like the WPS Act and the GFA and what they're trying to achieve. So it's kind of the U.S. undermining its own self and its own legislation and goals by continuing to have the statute operate as it does. Next slide, please. The biggest challenge to the statute was the 2010 Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project case, which challenged the constitutionality of the statute on First and Fifth Amendment grounds. Essentially, what the Humanitarian Law Project wanted to do was to train two FTOs, the Kurdistan Workers' Party in Turkey and the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Alam in Sri Lanka, on how to use UN conflict resolution and other nonviolent means to solve their disputes. But unfortunately, the court held that sections of AEDPA were not unconstitutionally vague and that Congress can constitutionally continue to prohibit the activities that the Humanitarian Law Project proposed. So essentially what this means is that in the name of national security, it found that assisting an FTO would help to legitimate that FTO and free up its resources for terrorist activities. So that was a big loss. There was a lot of people unhappy and a lot of pushback after it. Oh, next slide, please. And as this quote shows, there was a lot of deep disappointment over the ruling in this case. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for us today? We're now 13 years beyond the Holder v. HLP case. There's been a lot of efforts, especially by NPOs and civil society, to address and amend AEDPA in a lot of different creative and innovative ways. And unfortunately, those have all been stopped or blocked and haven't made it through. Megan's going to touch on these, on some of these. There's also been 3 separate letters to secretaries of state. There was an act that tried to make through but didn't make it. There's been UN special rapporteurs that have condemned the statute, but unfortunately it still remains. Next slide. Some of the specific impacts on peace building, which you'll hear more of from our colleagues, but just to note quickly, the risk and criminal liability, it often proves to be too risky for peace building organizations to undertake work in areas where FTOs operate, because they can face heavy fines or up to 20 years to life in prison if they're in violation of the material support statute. The U.S. government supported efforts say that if you want to engage someone who's left an FTO, even if it's on their own volition and they've chosen to leave, you can only do so if there's an official DDR process in place. And then obviously, I think everyone who's here today probably knows and is well aware that it impedes inclusive peace processes, because if you can't bring everyone to the table, you can't have a process that truly includes all actors. And then, of course, what we know about the knock-on effects, if peace processes aren't inclusive, you don't get to a strong peace agreement, and you don't sustain peace as you would if it was inclusive. And then just to note a little bit more on the gendered impacts, it impacts really smaller women-led civil society organizations, and this is kind of where you see overlap with the countering the financing of terrorism and them not being able to have the funds or support or the means or needs to even be able to operate, and then running into the problem of engaging with FTOs. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to wrap up here by noting that these are just 6 of the countries where the material support statute has had really negative, next slide, please. Oh, this is an older version. Okay, let's keep going. Here we go. These 6 countries where it's had just very negative impacts on peace building activities, and we can unpack those in each country after the session if folks are interested. Next slide. So now we're here today, and because we've worked so, next slide, or maybe the slide before.
One more before, maybe. One more before.
Okay, maybe this way. There we are. Okay, so where we are today, there's been, as I mentioned, a lot of advocacy around this, but I guess I just want to encourage everybody to say that change is possible if we continue advocating for it. Despite us not having been as far as we hoped we would be by now, it doesn't mean we can't get there. So change is possible. We just have to keep pushing for it, keep being creative, keep engaging the right people, and I think we all here, if you work on peace building, you're in the business of hope. So we just keep that hope as we move forward in trying to make the changes we need to it. So now I will hand it over.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was a very helpful overview and succinct, which is hard because there's a lot that goes under the material support statute. I think it paves the way very well to hear from our colleagues on the ground. And as I introduce each of them, I wanted to just give a brief kind of background on how we are able to support Abir, Zarqa, and Halima. We, in 2016, started, or 2015, the Innovative Peace Fund. By we, I mean ICAN, for those who weren't here when we started. It's still the only independent fund that is solely dedicated to supporting women-led peace-building organizations in conflict and crisis settings. The work that our partners engage in is exactly the work that Ashley just reflected. It's conflict resolution, it's engaging in security dialogues, it's de-radicalization, demobilization, it's peace-building just discussions. It makes it very hard for our partners to do that when you have the conditions that are put in place under the material support statute and other alliance sanctions. So we've tried very hard to develop a fund or a mechanism that will enable us to channel funds from donors who wouldn't actually normally reach these smaller women-led organizations on the ground. And we've attempted to create a mechanism that will allow us to absorb many of the due diligence and kind of higher level requirements that are necessary, and shield our partners in as many ways as possible from a lot of the barriers that exist. With that said, and as we'll hear from our colleagues in a minute, those barriers are still around and can't be avoided, both in terms of kind of administrative burdens, but then also the risk that the material support statute puts them in terms of operating, and the constraints that it puts on them in terms of actually being able to do the work that they seek out to do. So the two most important things I would say about the IPF is that we invest in trust, which means that we trust our partners' expertise, their knowledge, and their ability to really define their own priorities and interventions. So all the work that they do is work that they've come up with, and that they come to consult with us, and we provide them with strategic guidance and dialogue and technical assistance if and where needed. But these are their ideas, and we're there to support them. We also developed a flexible funding model so that they can change and adapt, because as we'll see in their discussions, they can set out to achieve one objective and they get there and they realize that they have to engage in a different way or engage a different actor or change at the drop of a hat. And so we've developed a fund that will allow them to both be flexible in terms of the administrative requirements to us, but also flexibility in doing what they need to achieve the goals that they've set out for. So with that, I'm looking forward to hearing from our colleague Abir Haj Ibrahim, a Syrian partner located in Lebanon, who's joining us, unfortunately not in person, but on video. So over to you, Abir.
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you for hosting me. Actually, I'm going to speak a little bit about the work that we've been doing inside Syria. You know, the Syria case was one of the most difficult cases ever, and still. And there was in the northwest, northeast, there was a like invasion from a terrorist organization through the last period of time, and then they left. We were operating in that area before they came, and once they are inside these areas, everyone left, including us, and we couldn't operate anymore because of the terrorist organization who was established themselves there, and they have like a huge violence and whatever. I don't want to bring into my mind these horrible views and photos, which all the world witnessed it during that time. So once it's over and they went out, we thought that it's good for us now to see and check what's happening, especially in the city called Raqqa city, which was the capital of ISIS for a period of time. And actually, there were some people who we knew before. They came back to us and said, look, now because we finished from ISIS, it's all went out. Could you please come again and start to work on a peace building, because we have a huge issues that we need to work around it. And once, as the checklist everywhere, most of the ministries of foreign affairs who were supporting us, they said, look, if you want to go back in this area, you need to have like an action research or research which bring you what's happening, context analysis, and from that context analysis, furthermore, you can go and design a program to intervene in your city, which is inside Syria. So we thought, if you are going to do the action research, one of its most important component is a community engagement. So we are going to engage most of the community members. That's one of the issues. Second, if you are going to design these programs, that means we are going to speak to everyone. So we will see who are the most vulnerable people who were attacked by the control of these terrorist organizations and work with them. Then it comes with a long list of risk mitigation processes. One of them is the material support. If you are going to speak to the people, that means you are engaging them in a workshop, in a meeting, at least you can do is offer them a cup of tea. Imagine, to the extent of cup of tea, we cannot offer them because it's something against the material support. And in Syria, along with so many other cultures issues, there's a norm that when we speak to each other and we have dialogue and we speak, at least you have like a coffee, tea, water, whatever. And at that level, we cannot do that. Then we said to ourselves, who says that these people who were in that city, they were happy by being engaged with the terrorist organization? And when we spoke to them over online, it seemed to be that there were quite a huge number of people. They were forced to be engaged with them. And some of them said, look, I want to protect me and my family, my sisters, my mother. And by being one of them, at least I can protect my family from being attacked or even from any sexual harassment or any rape process. It could happen. So there were lots of cases where people felt that a kind of a prevention and a kind of a protection for them and their family is to be engaged in this terrorist organization. So it's not their choice. They were forced to do that and they didn't have options to leave. Later on, we discovered that even if these people were engaged in this terrorist organization, they have a reflect on their life and they want to go back and to be merged inside the community itself. So by not talking to them, that means I am putting them again in a corner where nobody's listening to them and nobody's talking to them. There's no dialogue and nothing to intervene with them. And they will feel that they are vulnerable as well. So there will be like isolating a group of people who left the violence and who left the terrorist organization, but nobody's welcoming them. So it's also will increase the risk that they will go to violence again because I didn't open an option to them to welcome them back. So we felt that it's very difficult for us to go through. Then if we did not engage all the people in the action research, and if we did not involve all the people in the conflict sensitivity and other conflict context analysis tool, that means everyone, including the international communities, they are missing a part of the reality. They are not having the whole information about what's happening in that area. And that means we are putting whatever we have in our heads in a piece of paper as if it's an action research, but we are missing the whole part of the truth. So there are several obstacles that we found. And in that case, we couldn't respond positively for the needs of the people of that city, Raqqa, who suffered already from years of terrorist organizations.
Thank you so much, Abir. That's a perfect example and very well said. I think 3 quick points. One is that one of the challenges that you stated facing is that many times people are forced to join the terrorist groups, not by choice, and are actually looking for a way out. And if you can't engage them or talk to them, it makes it very hard for them to show them a possibility, an alternative. Also, in terms of your research, you are truly missing half of the picture because you couldn't engage the full population, which means it's incomplete, and as such, any responses that you develop to meet the needs of the citizens of Raqqa would be inadequate. And then the last thing is the cultural norms, and I imagine we'll hear that a little bit from some of our other colleagues as well, but if a lot of your work involves gaining trust of communities, but you can't sit down and offer them tea or coffee, it makes it very difficult to have those bonds and that trust, which makes it impossible to do your work. So we'll come back to you because I imagine that there are some questions for that. But I think next we'll go to our colleague, Zarqa Yaftali, who is joining us, and we'll talk about some of how this work has been impacted their work in Afghanistan. Thank you, Zarqa.
Yeah, thank you so much, Franz, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here in this panel discussion. First of all, I want to say thank you from the IPF for the support that we receive for support of our female staff after fall of Afghanistan. Thank you. Yeah, I hope now you can hear my voice. Regarding to material support, we all know about the situation of Afghanistan. I'm sure that we all know that what's going right now in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, after fall of Afghanistan, every day the being of extremists and violence and terrorist group going very high in the country. According to the information that we have from the different sources right now, about 21 different terrorists and also extremist group they are operating from Afghanistan, and definitely it will have direct impact on the work of women-led organization and also those organizations that they are working for a peace process and peace building in the country. I can say that right now, if you have 20 participants in one of your event, maybe about 20% of them will have some kind of affiliation to the different violence network and group that right now they are working in the country. And for us, not for just WCLRF, which I'm director, for all of the civil society organization, especially for women-led organization, it's very difficult that how we can identify these people among our participants. For example, right now those organizations that we are working and we are doing different research regarding to situation of women in the country, research regarding the situation of women IDP, research regarding to situation of girls that they are not allowing to go to the school. We will have some focus group discussion. We will provide lunch and refreshment for participants of our group discussion, and also those that they are a sample size of our research. So it's very difficult. But before fall of Afghanistan, on that time there was also problem regarding to material support issue, because on that time, as I was member of High Council for National Reconciliation and my organization, we did a lot for peace process and also peace building in the country. On that time, it made lots of problem for us, because we work for social peace in the in community with people, and definitely among the people that we work with them, and we had lots of work with those people and those family of the Taliban group that they were in the different provinces of Afghanistan. So the problem was in the previous, and right now I'm going to focus on the problem that we are facing regarding to material support about the women-led organization and also peace building organization that right now we are operating in Afghanistan. Right now, for a women-led organization, right now it's very difficult that organization continue its work after Taliban 24 December edicts that they banned the work of women, all women that they are working in NGO and INGO in the country. But with lots of problem, some organization, we want to continue some of our activities that we can do and implement right now. We want to do something for women empowerment and also for women issue. For example, we are trying a lot that we can find the opportunity to put together some women, not in our office, and some of our colleagues and some of our friends' home. We are doing this kind of activity, but it is very difficult. Right now, this is not the men that they have some kind of affiliation with terrorist and extremist group. Right now, there is a large number of women that they have some kind of affiliation with these groups. And for example, maybe they're the men of the family, they have some kind of affiliation with the terrorist group, and we don't know. We cannot identify those women which is among our beneficiary, right? For example, my organization, we are working on a research. We are conducting focus group discussion in the different provinces of Afghanistan. But for myself, for my colleagues, it is not clear that we cannot do any background check to the participant of our focus group discussion. So it will make lots of problem for us in the current situation and also for our in the future as well. And inside of this, right now, it is for women-led organization, we are going to find some ways, we are going to find some people that they can help us to continue. Through the head, we want to continue our work. But there are some people that they are famous, they have some relation in the province, they are volunteer to support us and regarding to implementation of our activity, but it is not clear for us about the background of those people. And it was very interesting for me that sometimes ago, one of the people which is religious, and we worked with them for a long time, he came to our office and he asked for my colleagues that he can support us to have some of our work in the province. But when we did some background check, right now he is working as in one of the security department of the Taliban. So he was not in the previous. If we go with him, so definitely it will be make lots of problem for us. So I, from my perspective in Afghanistan, it is very difficult to find some information about the background of the people, and we should work. We should work with different people to continue our work. But because when we want to work for peace building in the country, we should engage with the different group, especially with the Taliban group. And now, right now, they are a terrorist group. So how we can work and how we can design some programs which is about peace building, and also if we want to work for social peace. It is right now it is an obstacle for us, the support material issue, because it will be make lots of problem for us, not just for right now, and for the future as well. So as Ashley said, so there is we can bring change, and with right advocacy we can do something. So I think if we want to support women-led organization, if we want to support peace building and women peace building builders in the different countries, especially those countries that there is conflict and there is need to work for peace, there is need to have a joint advocacy to bring amendment in this law. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zarka John. I'm very sorry. I did not introduce the organizations of the partners, which was, I failed in the first role as a moderator. And I don't know, Zarka, you said WCLRF, but it would be great if you could tell.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Women and Children Legal Research Foundation, WCLRF. We are working since 2003 right now in Afghanistan, and right now we are still working in the country. We are working in Kabul and some other province of Afghanistan regarding to research, advocacy, and awareness raising. But right now, as you know, the situation in Afghanistan is very dire, and working for women empowerment, peace process, and also gender equality is very difficult, because Taliban putting pressure and restriction on the right of women, and also on the work of women lead organization and women focus organization day by day. But we are trying our best, and we want to continue, and I hope that one day we can bring change in the situation of women in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Zarka John. And our colleague Abir works with Mobadr Network, which is based out of Lebanon, but works in Turkey and inside Syria and around. And then I'll let Halima in a moment introduce the Coast Education. But I just wanted to point out, Zarka had said two really interesting things, which I think permeate across all of our partners, women peacebuilding organizations. One is that the Taliban in Afghanistan, but violent extremist groups everywhere, infiltrate society. So it's very hard to distinguish who's Taliban and who's not, right? They don't just wear purple hats or live in houses with green shutters. They are become part of their technique, right, is to become part of society and to infiltrate social, political, schools, medical. So it's very hard to have a distinction when you're a peace-building organization of who you're engaging and who you're not. They also don't have the resources. There's not a database that exists that has all those that are affiliated with the Taliban, because it changes day by day, right? And so it's very hard for any peace-building organization to ensure, as Zarka said, that anytime you hold a dialogue, the likelihood that possibly 20% that are there are going to have some affiliation with the Taliban. If Zarka were to sit there and say, okay, everybody who's affiliated with the Taliban, raise your hand, that would be a huge risk to her organization. And to the women that work for it. So it ends up creating more challenges to peace building than it does benefits. And now we'll go to, hopefully Halima is with us, yes? Is she there? Halima Mohammed with COEC, the Coast Education. Is she?
I'm here, Fran.
Perfect. Go ahead, Halima.
It's always a challenge speaking after Abir and Zaka, a powerhouse, and now I have to keep up and pitch myself in their shoe. So I hope I'll do justice. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Halima Mohammed. I work for Coast Education Center based in Mombasa, Kenya. So I want to relate some of the questions what my colleagues have been talking about. Way back in 2016, when my country launched the national strategy to counter violent extremism, and didn't have the touch of women and any word regarding women, and or also gender. So we rally around with stakeholders, with women stakeholders around my country, specifically at the coastal region. Kenya has 47 counties, and where I belong is around the 6 counties. So in these 6 counties, where we try to collect views with technical support from ICANN under the IPF. We try to collect views of women in regards to the national strategy. How do we feel? How does it resonate with us as women? Because we know that initially we thought that only men were being radicalized, were being forced to join the extremists or voluntarily, joining the FTOs. But again, come to realize that also women were joining the FTOs, which was also trying to understand what are the reasons that are forcing them to join the extremist groups. But again, with the document that we developed, the first ever charter was basically trying to get the views of women on how either the psychosocial pillar, the gender pillar should be part and parcel of the recent pillar and under the national strategy for CVE. At the same time, the political pillar, the ideology pillar. So what does it say when it comes to women? So with ICANN support, we developed the first ever CVE charter that talks about psychosocial pillar, how women are affected psychosocially in terms of the trauma that goes into. These are women who are supported by their husbands. These are women who look up to their sons who are doing jobs and supporting them with daily bread. But again, these men of the house have either been forced to join the extremist groups, are either kidnapped to join extremist groups, and they're left with no one. So those kind of women, for us, we help them in terms of recovery under trauma. So I can support us to have trauma sessions with these women, understanding where all this came through. Someone will tell you their husbands have disappeared for almost 6 years, have no idea where they are. And then the question have always been resonating with us is, what really happens when they join these extremist groups? What happens in there? Whether it's women who join extremist groups, what really happened in those camps? Do they have matrons? Do they join the combat? So those were the aspects of us to understand what really happens when they join. But again, we felt like we have a quota, that is an act in Kenya that restricts Kenyans from interacting with directly with extremists. That's why we have Ministry of Interior under the NCTC, National Counterterrorism Center, that works on re-radicalization and reintegration of when they come back. So this process also becomes a lot of challenges, because for us to understand what really happens, that means we need to engage with them. But again, those restrictions makes our work a little bit harder for us to understand what happens, what in that process where either someone is being radicalized. At the same time, you get someone telling a story. Other peace building organizations have done research, and that research actually talks about how a young lady was recruited to join the extremist groups. And she was actually promised scholarship. So joining an extremist group in a way that someone was promised a scholarship will be able to support her family, and looking at the poverty rate. And this person was supposed to be sponsored under the Islamic law. And she felt like, because I did well in my secular education, and this is an opportunity for me to join. So someone joins, and down the line, 2 years, someone is back. And when you ask her where you have been, and they give you a tragic story. So all this, to me, when I look at material support, is how do we interact with these people? How do we ensure that we listen to them? I will tell you an example. Women-led organizations have a way to get through, have a way to listen. We can bring the sense of belonging to the young people, to everybody in the world. Because if you look at it in my way, is everyone who is seated in that room today, either you are a man, either you are a son, when you go back, you will ask for your mother or you will ask for your wife, the first thing you get into the house. And that gives us an opportunity that we are special and we are important. So to me, I feel like given an opportunity to interact with these people who are requesting for amnesty and later on can be handed over to civil society to be able to engage them, to be able to offer counseling. And we do it for free. We have people like ICANN and the rest who are willing to support. But again, restrictions, all countries have their own restrictions. And I'm looking at how do we support these young people, these women and girls who have come back and are requesting for amnesty. To be able to do that, we will need we'll need proper laws to be able to guide us and policy frameworks. But in all this, how do we ensure that we are also safeguarded in terms of safety and security? That is the most important thing. Thank you very much, France.
Thank you so much, Halima. That was incredibly, you kept up very well with all the speakers. Well done. You raised several good points, but I think one of the new ones that we have here is it's impossible to understand why individuals would join a violent extremist group if you don't actually understand their motivations. And you can't understand their motivations unless you're able to talk to them. And on the flip side of that, when they choose to leave, as Ashley had pointed out earlier, the only exception to the material support statute is that there's a DDR process in place. In many cases, most of the individuals who are trying to leave these groups don't have the option or opportunity to go through an official DDR process. However, there are local civil society organizations that have the means, the power, the knowledge, the trust to be able to connect with them and help them find an alternative pathway. If you can't actually sit down and have a conversation with them, you can't help them find that pathway. And the last thing, Halima, which I think was really, really important, is the value of women. The distinction of how women have entry points that men and other members of the community don't, which enables them to have a conversation, to be trusted by brothers, sisters, fathers, and to have a level of dialogue that would not otherwise be available or avail itself to other stakeholders in this work. So I don't want to take too much more time, and I imagine there'll be some questions for our panelists after, but would love to go to our colleague Megan Corrado, who's going to hopefully provide us with some solutions.
No problem. I got this.
Yeah, you got it, exactly.
Well, great to see everyone. I'm Megan Corrado, Director of Policy and Advocacy with the Alliance for Peacebuilding. So on behalf of AFP, thanks for coming back again for day 3. It's been an intense but really enriching few days. So just really pleased to be with you all here and online. And thanks so much to ICANN and CSN for organizing this session. We've been working on this issue for a long time together, and several others in this room, and many organizations. Because it's been a problem since 2004. So just appreciate the time and space. And just thank you so much, Ashley, for that framing. It's really helpful. It's really wonky. It's complicated. There's a lot of layer to this process. This is not the sexiest panel you can review today. But it is so critical to actually facilitating the work that can address the drivers of extremism and violence and conflict. So thank you for that. And then thank you, of course, to our partners who, this is real. These laws have real impacts, tangible impacts that undermine peace processes and peace building globally. So just so appreciative of their stories and insight. So we've been trying. We've been trying to address this for some time. The landscape got a little funny after 2010 with the Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project. This is under the Obama administration. They then issued this memo that basically created a don't ask, don't tell policy, which really confused us. So we have the law, we have this Supreme Court decision, but really DOJ said, just go do what you're going to do. Don't really let us know about it. We're not going to prosecute us. That's great. We're glad we're not getting prosecuted, but that's not real. The law is still the law of the land, and here's the thing, administrations change. So we know that things would shift, not as dramatically as they did end up, but we knew this wasn't a satisfactory approach. So in 2013, 2014, in Congress, there was an effort led by the humanitarians at first. It was called the Humanitarian Assistance Facilitation Act, to basically create and codify exemptions for the humanitarian community. The state ultimately did not pass. In 2015 through 2017, there was a more robust effort that included both humanitarians and peacebuilding assistance, and really wanted to help these groups engage in what are called incidental transactions. And these can be, you heard some allusions to it already today, but paying visas, paying road tolls, utility bills, your water. If an FTO controls the water and you have an office space, that's technically material support. And of course, the T. And we weren't just being cheeky in the title of this session. It's no T for terrorists. That's kind of our long-running joke, not funny joke at all, but it's no T for terrorists, because you literally cannot provide T that is considered material support. So in the last few years, we have actually made some progress on the legislative front. We have a very beautiful law, or legislative text, I should say, that is written to carve out some exemptions to really facilitate humanitarian peacebuilding assistance. A coalition of organizations, many of which are in the room and online, have come together and pounded the pavement. And we actually secured bipartisan champions. I won't say who they are because this effort still is ongoing. But there is increasing recognition of the challenges of this material support prohibition to this work. And so all this time while we've been doing this advocacy, kind of socializing these issues with Congress, our NGO partners have been doing the hard work. And we've had a number of very serious crises in the last few years in particular. And their good work and the safeguards that they put in place help make our advocacy efforts easier. So we can look at this big NGO, look at this big humanitarian organization. There have been no dollars diverted to terrorists. None of us want that. It's clearly, we all put protections in place. But one of the biggest challenges and why we really do need the law is because banks, financial institutions, there's a huge risk to them if our funds that we access from their banks end up in terrorist hands. And so this, again, really not sexy issue, de-risking and financial access are absolutely vital. And banks are just not going to take the risk that their money ends up in adversaries' hands. So as we've noted, the law has not kept pace with the evolving challenges and new programmatic approaches to prevent conflict, reduce violence, and build sustainable peace. Ashley alluded to it. In the last few years, Congress has created a toolbox, what I call the prevention-oriented canon of law. You have the WPS Act, the Global Fragility Act, and the Eli Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act. The central pillars of all three of these is prevention, preventing violence, preventing extremism, preventing conflict. Unfortunately, Congress has handcuffed us. We cannot do that prevention work. We cannot go address the drivers of violence and extremism if we cannot speak to the actors involved, as has been really well articulated by our colleagues. So this existing bar is going to continue to frustrate the realization of this toolbox. So unless we come up with a fix, we're not going to be able to realize the aims of those laws. We have some solutions in place theoretically. Again, Ashley alluded to this waiver authority that the Secretary of State, concurrence of Attorney General, can actually exercise to create exceptions. I will tell you, this will never, ever, ever happen. There is no political will for any administration to say, oh yeah, we did this, and it can very easily be manipulated to say, oh, they allowed this organization to give money to terrorists. Clearly that's not what's happening. It's just never gonna. There's no political will, and we've been quietly told by members of both Republican and Democratic administrations it never will. So we cannot rely upon that, and the fact that it hasn't been exercised to date, gives us further credence to that point. So what we've been trying to do, we've been trying to create exceptions that are authorized by Treasury Department, by OFAC. So anything that is currently licensed under OFAC allow us to do those activities. So again, OFAC does issue licenses to do peace building, to do humanitarian assistance and things like that. It's often very narrow and very context specific, so we want to see something bigger in legislation. Again, we want to address these ordinary and incidental transactions. Let's give some tea out if we can. You know, this is the goal. So to have this boom, 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 very widespread, but also tailored. You know, even the peace building assistance, again, we want to be engaging in formal and informal DDR process. We want to be having consultations with stakeholders. We know how peace building in general is most effective when you have, you know, all the voices at the table. And so we need that space to be able to do that work to, again, prevent conflict and to resolve it. So this is our overarching aim. I think we're in a challenging space right now with the current composition of Congress. We still have some bipartisan champions. We're still having these conversations. One potential solution is to do a pilot within the pilots. And by those pilots, I mean of the GFA. We have 4 countries and 1 region that the U.S. government is committed to doing programming related to peace building and prevention. This would be an interesting space to pilot within pilot. And if anybody is working on the GFA, you know it's not a lot of money. So there's not a lot of risk for the U.S. government. We're trying to change that as well, but for now, it's not a big pot from which funds could even be diverted. And it would allow us to go do the work, you know, particularly thinking about Libya, Mozambique, and coastal West Africa, could potentially expand. We'll see what the next 10 years hold for us. But allowing peace builders to operate in places, you know, north of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique in particular, as one example, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Let's do some reporting on it. Let's do some evidence collection. Let's do some data. And then we can go back to Congress and say, hey, look, really everything that you feared wasn't real life. You know, we were able to conduct this really important work. And here, that would just help our case in getting the more comprehensive legislative fix that would, you know, prevent us from the whims of, you know, shifting from administration to administration. So we will see how that works out. Again, we're also advocating for the government to, you know, do a minimal waiver on the GFA countries in particular. Again, minimal risk. I'm doubtful that would actually succeed. I think we have a better chance on the legislative side, actually. But just something to keep in mind as we move forward. So, again, I think Ashley's hopeful note of ending was really helpful. There is a dedicated team of folks in the weeds on this issue. You know, it's a really great example of humanitarians, peace building, human rights organizations, development folks coming together. You know, folks that aren't often in the same conversation, working really hard on these issues. So that gives me hope and a big tent. And I think humanitarians have a really important voice, and they also get a lot more money than the peace building sector. So it's kind of helpful to have them working in tandem with us. So lots more work to do. You know, evidence collection is going to be critical. I think this pilot idea, you know, could really help us move forward. So I'll stop there and welcome questions. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was really helpful. I would love to go to the audience for questions, and if there's an opportunity, I'd love to come back to you. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit more about what this pilot would look like. And actually, you didn't mention any of the countries that our partners on this panel are sitting on, but if they were to do a pilot in Syria, what would that look like, right? And kind of what could be the implications for our partners would be good to know. I think a discussion, which I don't want to open Pandora's box, but is probably in a lot of our heads, is when you talk about the amount of money, the paucity of money that does go to peace-building organizations, peace-building in general, and then the 0.2% sliver of that goes to women-led peace-building organizations versus the accountability on some other defense or possibly military spending. The irony is not lost on us that the restrictions and conditions that are put down on the several $100,000 that one organization could get, and I call it kind of the shackles. So it's, I think that's a much larger topic, but maybe for another panel at AFP another time. But would love to go to the audience, either online or in the room, and see if there's any feedback or questions for any panelists. Florentine.
Yes, thank you all for the presentation. I have 2 questions. The first one is, like, other than the challenges that you mentioned in Afghanistan, what are the top 3 challenges that women-led peace organizations face, whether it's in Somalia or Nigeria or Sri Lanka? What are those top 3 challenges that the women-led organization, the peace-building organizations face? That's my first one. My second question is maybe specifically for Ashley and Megan. I just want to understand the difference between in terms of terrorism. Let's say an American person does something, the same thing that an immigrant does in terms of killing people. Where is the line between the immigrant is termed as a terrorist and then the American is not? I just want to understand the difference and whether the definition of terrorism is different, and if it's different, why is it different? Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to maybe take a couple questions and then we can go? Yeah, please, Raja.
I think, so I'm Raja Tali from CCSP, and I think it would be useful to define when we are talking about what is peace building in Afghanistan. I think because this is important in order to see really how women organization and women-led organization can push this path a little bit further. Because I think it's understood that are you making peace with Taliban, are you recognizing Taliban, etc. And this is where I want to look. It might be dangerous to be seeking that path. So I hope that this is not necessarily for this panel only, but this is something that to move it further. Because it's not going to affect only Afghanistan, it will affect Syria, it will affect many other countries if we are going into that path.
Do we have any questions from, I see one, is there some?
There's 2 questions.
Okay.
Can you read them?
Yeah, that would be great.
The first one says, for Megan and everyone else, what are the primary concerns on the Hill that are preventing carving out humanitarian/peacebuilding exemptions from the material support statute from the CTF side? That's the first question. The second one is, how would a pilot exemption initiative within the GFA priority countries be executed via some kind of blanket OFAC designation?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sanam.
Following on from the question, sorry, Sanam and maybe from ICAP, following on from the question of what the resistance is, I'm just wondering, is this a space where we could be thinking about a different way of conveying the absurdity of this information? And we do, as you know, we do animations, we use imagery, but to be able to get through to Congress these stories, and so that one is kind of thinking about imagery and other ways of getting information. The second is, what's the chance of us being able to do a panel like this, but actually for Congress, but the WPS caucus, the whatever caucuses, Foreign Affairs caucus, and the Senate, just so that they hear it, because it's one thing for you guys to say it, or for us even to say it. It's a whole other thing when you're hearing, Abir saying we can't give them a cup of tea, or it's the families of, or it's the Boko Haram girls that come up, and so I'm just wondering that, bringing that reality to the Hill. Can we do something like that as almost repeatedly, so that but the use of visuals, is that something that you thought about? We'd be happy to.
Thanks, Sanam. I think, so we have a couple questions specifically for Ashley and Megan. Maybe if it's okay with you all, I might go to Zarka first.
Yeah, they can start.
Oh, you want the, okay. Sure. Or we'll go to Ashley and Megan first. And then Abir and Halima, some of the general questions I think, which will be applicable if you can help, are the top 3 challenges for women peace builders. So we'll go Megan or Ashley, which one of you would like to start off first?
I'm happy to start. So just a couple of those concerns on the Hill. So I think we pushed very hard, so don't forget, very short election cycles, every 2 years. There's a lot of money that needs to be raised in that time. There's not a lot of attention. The I don't know, past several sessions of Congress have been very low in the amount of bills they actually pass. Laws are basically passed through two vehicles these days, appropriations and when they can even get that in, because oftentimes we're operating on what's called continuing resolutions because they can't agree on a budget, and the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which is ironically the peacebuilding community's best friend. So we attach all our stuff to the defense budget, which we hate. We don't want to do that. But there, how now the last Congress did pass a state reauthorization bill, so we were able to move forward on that. Anyway, that's very wonky. Point being, there aren't a lot of opportunities to do standalone legislation on something like this. And I will tell you, strategically, as the community, we did not want them to do that either. We didn't want to even put our Democrat or Republican friends standing up and saying, let's pass material support, let's legislative fix. We didn't want them to put that in position. We wanted this to be very quiet. We did want to attach it to one of those larger vehicles. Just not that we didn't want them to have this scrutiny, but there's a lot of misunderstanding. And as I said, this is very wonky, very complicated, unsexy. And it's very easy to misunderstand what we're trying to do here. And so we really kept this effort quiet. And that's why, I don't want to say who our champions were. It can very easily be perceived as being weak on terrorism. And so to go back to your constituents and someone to question your legislative record for standing up for this could be really problematic. So we wanted to make their lives as easy as possible. And so time just kind of ran out on the session last year. We were hoping, we really wanted to get it in the first year. There's basically two years of a congressional session. We wanted to get it done in the first year. Lots of wonky procedural parliamentary reasons why that actually didn't happen. And then when it came up to the second year, that's when we ran up against elections and campaign season. So that was some, sort of the challenge. We kept a really quiet approach in the past. Maybe now we don't. Maybe we do start doing briefings. We did a lot of socialization, meeting with individual offices and committees very quietly. Maybe it is time to change tact. Again, we finally have movement on the GFA and these other prevention spaces. Maybe it is time to raise, and that's something we're thinking about. So more to come, and would absolutely love to hear these impactful stories and use different tools. I think imagery is really powerful, especially on the Hill where there's very limited attention span. I will just say quickly on the GFA idea, we'd like to see that codified in law. Again, that would prevent changes from administration to administration. An OFAC license is a possibility. That would be less ideal, again, because those are subject to changes within the administration. So if things change, again, GFA is 10 years. So who knows what happens. So again, I think the legislative fix is more ideal.
Yeah, I thank you, Megan. That was very comprehensive and well covered. I'll just note that one of the primary concerns on the Hill is that nobody wants to be seen as soft on terrorism. So even your more progressive folks in Congress, everybody's really, really shy about being seen as that. So this narrative, it's again like going back to this very post 9/11 world that we're still living in, despite us not actually being in that same context today. But Congress, the Hill, they haven't moved beyond that. So that narrative is one of the big impediments there. In terms, I'm going to also jump on the pilot. I think one of the values would be that if we can show that we did this pilot and the sky didn't fall, we could then say, look, this can be replicated in more countries. Can we expand this globally? So like Megan said, having that kind of evidence and data-driven ways to show, look, we did this and things were okay. Now we can expand that out further. In terms of challenges for peacebuilders, I think ICANN's Women Peacebuilders is probably the best placed. But one thing, that remains, and France noted this, funding. That whole concept of fund us like you want us to win is still not happening. So how do we support those actors that really do the most and are really concretely able to bring about the most change within communities, within the national level, within the international sphere? Without funding, it's really, really hard to do that. noting on the absurdity and how do we address that, I think we should, in peace building, I think it's this is no secret. We're not always great at communicating what even peace building is and what it does and what it means and how to do it well. Explaining prevention is very challenging. So something like this, which is so technical and legal and in the weeds, I think we should push ourselves to be creative. And how do we make it sexy? Is there a way to make it sexy? There probably is. We just have to find it. And if we haven't found it yet, take a little bit of the onus on us to find the ways to do that. I think graphics are also a great idea. How do we, what can we do to make that more real and tangible? To the American versus immigrant and how that's treated, I hope this is answering your question, but to note that there are some pushes to say, at least in the U.S. context, to look domestically and say, like, we need white nationalist groups to be called what they are, which is terrorist. The problem is that a lot of those pushes actually
I like that. It's very dramatic.
Sexy. Speaking of sexy, a lot of those pushes are actually kind of disguised in ways to expand the counterterrorism architecture, which we don't want to happen because it will end up, in the end, targeting immigrant communities, Black and brown communities, as we've seen. So it's a tricky space to navigate. And while it seems like it would be a good thing and should be done and call people what they are when they're behaving in the ways they do, they are terrorists, but we don't want to expand the CT architecture even wider.
Can I just say one thing on that,
yeah,
too?
please.
Last count, which could be a little out of date at this point, there were 23 different definitions of terrorism within the United States government. So FBI, DHS, CIA, DOD, et cetera. So that's a challenge. I don't think we have a good definition of domestic violent extremist or domestic terrorist. Really valid point, and that definitely merits an entire other panel. So,
and just to add to that, back in 1998 in the UK, they did the first thing on trying to define terrorism. There were 103 definitions.
Yeah, and there's still no internationally agreed upon definition, which then makes it overly broad, and states often weaponize that very, very intentionally.
And on the flip side, then we're asked to define peace building.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
We can't define violent extremism, and it's a question. I would love to come to Sarkar, and we won't have time for this, and we have a beer who would like to say something in just a couple minutes before we close. A question, Megan and Ashley, that follows as well is, like, where, to Sanam's point about how we convey this information, where are they getting this information? Because the whole idea of being soft on terrorism, if they're listening to what people are saying, it's actually having the counter effect, right? So we're actually opening up the doors for terrorism to increase because we're not able to address it. So who are they listening to and how? And are they just sitting on the Hill, or are they actually having the dialogues with the people who can explain truly what's happening and what's the way that we can convey that, if not? But would love to come to Zarkajan, and then a last minute from Abir before, a last word from Abir before we close. Please, Zarka.
Thank you, Franz. Regarding to three top problem and difficulties that the women lead organization right now facing in Afghanistan. The first is that women lead organization and women focus organization, they don't have the right to work because after the edict of Taliban on 24th of December that they banned the work of all women employee in NGO and INGO. From that time till now, women lead organization, they cannot continue their work. This is the first problem. The second problem is that they don't have resources right now. After fall of Afghanistan, about 700 NGOs registered in the Ministry of Economy, and all of these NGOs are running and leading by the Taliban. Maybe not Taliban in the lead of this organization, but it is leading by their friends and relatives. So all of those organizations right now, they have access to the resources. When the project and programs coming to Afghanistan, they by abusing of their relation, they can have access to this kind of support, but no woman-led organization. So resources, another problem. And inside of this, right now, the security and also legal support is another problem, because right now there isn't any legal government in Afghanistan. So woman-led organization, we don't have any legal support in the country. And if you don't have legal support, definitely it will be make lots of threat and risk for your work. When there isn't anyone in the as a government to support you, definitely the people, the communities, they are not supporting you. And inside of this internal problem, there is lots of problem from international community as well. This is because this is the international community that they are going to shrink the space for woman-led organization right now in Afghanistan. So these are the main three problem in Afghanistan, and what does peace building for us, for woman-led organization in Afghanistan. Right now we are not, there isn't any way to do some kind of peace process with the Taliban, because Taliban is an extremist and terrorist group. They are not accepting women as a human, but if they remove all of the restriction on women, the restriction that they put on a woman employee, woman in political participation, and also woman education, on that time we can have some kind of negotiation with the Taliban. But and also it is very important that they should agree that they are going to establish an inclusive government with leadership of women in the government. So on that time we can have some kind of negotiation with the Taliban. But for us, peace building is mean that how we can work regarding to social peace in the country. Right now it is important to work for social peace in the different communities. And inside of this, how we can work with new generation of Afghanistan, how we can have some kind of sharing of information and experience with the new generation, with girls, with boys, different youth groups. They should know about the women, peace and security agenda in the country, because I'm sure that the situation will be changed in Afghanistan. And if all of the mind of the new generation of Afghanistan, more than 20 million people, they have extremist viewpoint and mentality. So how they can accept women, peace and security, how they can accept women leadership and women political participation in the future. So I think it's very important to work with the new generation of Afghanistan regarding to peace building and peace process, women peace agenda in the country.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah. Is that, yeah.
It's okay. We can go a few minutes later.
Okay. So noting that Zarka is, of course, the expert on Afghanistan here, I did just want to note, do you remember at the beginning when I said the material support statute's very confusing? Afghanistan is a very good example of that, because the Taliban are not designated as a foreign terrorist organization, or FTO, which all the stuff I talked about, AEDPA, applies to foreign terrorist organizations. That's what the prohibition applies to. The Taliban are actually designated as a specially designated global terrorist group.
Entity?
SDGT, entity something. So, and this is a very, very pointed political decision by the U.S., because the U.S. knew if they designate the Taliban as an FTO, they cannot engage with them. So the Doha talks could never have happened. So just to note, this is all very political. It's very confusing. Why should activists on the ground doing FGDs have to understand who's designated as what, and what does that mean for my engagement? It's back to the absurdity. It's pretty outrageous. So just wanted to highlight that.
So just to clarify, so if you're at the moment in Afghanistan, the material support law does not apply for work in Afghanistan, because the Taliban is not an FTO?
And because there have been pretty expansive general licenses from OFAC, and again, that could change next administration. But as she rightly pointed out, there are 20-something,
Other groups.
yes, who are designated, which make that work very complicated. So it's again very wonky.
Yeah,
If
and
we
very
could-
political.
Yeah. If we don't understand it here, then how can we? So, if we could go quickly to Abir and Halima. Do you want to go, Abir? Do you want to say something first?
Yes, the top three challenges actually, and number one, which is the most important things, are donors versus politics. So this is the catastrophe of our work all over. When a donor comes and says, look, I'm going to work with peace building, but I don't want to work at that area, and I'm going to reduce the resources of funding opportunity on that area and give it to another, completely mess. The second is our understanding about what does it mean triple nexus approach, what does it mean localization as a peace building organization across countries. It's not only limited to Syria. And the third, which is the last one, the security issue and our own security issue as a women peace builders. And it comes third, the donor and politics, it comes and the risks on our own life, it comes at the third. Thank you.
Thank you, Abir. That should be first, but Halima.
Yes, Franz. Well, women peace builders face risk as men peace builders and defenders, but women face additional and different threats that are shaped by entrenched gender stereotypes, ingrained social perceptions of women. There is fear of social rejection and what it happens to them if they become victims of violence, where there's little provision for the women survivors, and they find themselves asking if it is really worth it. They face complex risk and targeted threats to their physical, emotional, political, economic, and spiritual health, and also digital security and safety, and that of their families and dependents. I'll tell you that why the safety of women peace builders has always been one of the most critical areas that we have tackled under Women Alliance for Security Leadership during our annual events that is supported by ICANN. And one of the questions that we always talk about is protection of women peace builders. Mm-hmm. How do we ensure protection of women peace builders from Somalia, from Iran, from Syria, from Afghanistan? So that is the most important thing that we always talk about. And we have to come to a conclusion to ensure that these frameworks and policy of women's safety and security needs to be enhanced under the UN missions and governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Halima. I wish we had more time. I thank you all for staying a couple minutes late. And I think I would just close the end point. I think what we've heard from all the panelists here is that the purpose of the material support statute is to prevent violent extremism, right? But the antidote to violent extremism is the promotion of pluralism. And when you have violent extremist groups who deliberately infiltrate societies, promoting one narrative, right, that you have to be one way and align with one identity, what happens is that if you can't engage those people, right, then the society becomes just unionar, right, and the pluralism goes out the window. And you end up having these two competing populations. So the violent extremists are trying to get at the population, and the peace builders are too. And the material support statute ends up shackling the peace builders and not enabling them to actually engage that population, which leaves them vulnerable to further recruitment and to growth. So I think, in short, let's work together to see how we can get these stories and these voices heard in the places they need to be, whether it's quiet or it's loud. Let's find a way to push forward. And thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you.